Good morning, everyone. I'll just make sure that everyone, I think it's good to.
Okay, so hello everyone and good morning to all. Welcome to another interesting episode of Insti. So it is a part of Instagram Live where we bring researchers and speakers from around the world. Uh, so Insti is a part of RSD Research Scholar Day, which is happening on from 2 to 4 April. So in RSD, we have various events such as startups, lecture series, and workshops where you can join for any cultural events and competitions. So you all are welcome in that. So in this episode, we have Melissa Pappas. He's from Australia, and she's a marine biologist and a science communicator and a scuba diver also. So welcome, Melissa. So how is it?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I am a PhD student at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. Currently, I'm in Arizona in the US because COVID made everything crazy this past year, and so I came back to my home country. But I'm still working on science communication, and marine science has been my career for the last 6 years.
That's great. So we welcome you on behalf of everyone from IIT Madras Research Affairs team. So I hope it's exciting for you and it's exciting for us as well to listen on biomimicry and climate change and some of your scuba diving experience. So maybe we can start the session. So everyone, if anyone has questions, you can ask anytime in the chat box, and you need not wait until the end of the session. So we'll address the questions live itself. So the session, entire IG live session will have like roughly 5 sections. So the first section is talk with a picture. So I'll be showing a picture and Melissa will tell us a biomimicry example for each organism which we are showing. So this is the first one.
So this is a whale. And maybe just to clarify, biomimicry is actually basically taking ideas from biology and mimicking those to other inventions or engineering. So for example, with this whale example, one of the common examples is that the humpback whale fin is actually scalloped, and the scalloped edge of that fin allows it to have less drag in the water when it's moving. And so engineers took that design and applied it to wind turbine blades so that the turbine blades have less drag in the air as they're moving, and it allows them to move at very slow speeds, which just increases the range of renewable energy source.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. So for our Research Scholars Day, we are going to have a special focus on biomimicry, and I think this session will serve as a good premiere for everyone who's going to join Research Scholars Day in April. So this is the second picture. I hope it's clear.
It's seaweeds, correct?
Yeah.
So one of the examples for biomimicry with seaweeds is actually the way that they're held onto the substrate on the bottom of the ocean floor. So seaweeds hold on to the bottom with a structure called a holdfast, which you could think of as similar to tree roots holding them to the earth. And what that allows them to do is maintain an upright orientation, although the waves are pushing them back and forth. And this allows them to be durable yet flexible. And some of the engineering that has come out of using this hold fast idea is attaching floats to the bottom of a substrate that actually take energy from wave action, and turn that into a renewable energy source. And the way that those floats are actually held on to the substrate is through this technology of a holdfast, where it allows the orientation to stay upright even though there's immense wave action. And another thing with those holdfasts is that it allows the actual float to lay flat on the surface of the substrate if the wave action is too high. for it to actually function. So it's really safe and sustainable design, and it comes straight from nature.
Yeah, so I think personally, like taking designs from nature is an advantage because nobody is going to question you like why you copied. So we have enough of organisms.
Yes, it's not plagiarism.
So this is the next picture for you. I hope it's clear.
Is this one an oyster?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the examples for biomimicry with oysters, and specifically oyster reefs, like oyster beds, is the way that they cement themselves to their structure. So an oyster actually combines two different things to create a really flexible and durable adhesive. And what it does is it creates its own bioproduct that comes from proteins that kind of form a network or like a net, and then calcium carbonate that comes from their actual shell. So a real mineral joins that sticky kind of protein net, and it allows this adhesive to be very durable in water, but also very flexible. And this is exactly a kind of engineering technology that we can be using for adhesives in structures that are on the coast, or also structures that are in our own bodies, for example, dental adhesives and repairing bones.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to learn about these examples because it helps as an incentive to actually pursue biodiversity conservation. Because if there is a commercial purpose, I'm sure that many of these organisms will still have a reason to exist on this planet for all the time.
Yes.
So this is the last one.
Oh, yeah, fish scales. There's a couple different things that fish scales have been used for, at the idea of them and like the purpose of them. One of the things that I found while looking up these examples was that fish scales are actually multi-layered. They have a hard kind of bony structure on the top, which protects their more collagen protein level on the bottom. And the way that they're formed, which kind of overlaps on themselves, like a suit of armor or armadillo, if you can think of something like that, it actually protects the animal from penetration. So let's say, you know, a fish swimming in the ocean gets attacked by a larger fish or a shark, something with teeth. If it bites down on the scales, the actual formation of the scales, the design of them, distributes the pressure evenly over the surface area. So it avoids direct penetration. And ideas for this type of material can be used in any sort of human protective gear. So gloves or materials that we use to protect ourselves from penetration, or working in environments that are very dangerous, working with sharp blades, things like that. Another thing that came out of fish scales is kind of similar. It's actually from shark skin, and this has been a common example for biomimicry, where shark skin is actually made up of very microscopic, backwards kind of curved teeth. They're called denticles, and the shape of their skin and the shape of these denticles actually allow the shark to move faster in water. So it's a design that was adopted by swimsuit companies to make Olympic swimmers swim faster in water.
Okay, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
now, this is just a question like out of the blue. Like, if you were able to take one of the superpowers from each of these organisms, like which one would you choose to take? Like personally, which you can imbibe.
This has been something I've actually thought about before, because my research is in coral symbiosis and the relationship between coral and algae that basically creates food from the power of the sun. And if I could harness any ability from nature, I would actually choose maybe having photosynthetic skin. Sit outside and you could feed yourself.
Yeah, so that's one of the questions like human scientists have not yet been able to crack, right? So it would be really awesome to have photosynthetic capability. So yeah, so actually I think these 4 examples would have been very interesting for everyone to actually pursue or look into what biomimicry is. So I think now Sankalpa will take over to ask some questions about grad school journey.
Yeah. So you were telling us about your current research on coral symbiosis. So what actually sparked your interest in research and your research journey?
So when I started going into the marine biology path, I started doing that in my undergrad. And my idea wasn't developed to anything specific. I just knew that I really liked looking at ocean animals and I wanted to be a part of conserving that environment. I actually did a research internship while I was an undergrad, and it was all on fish bones. And, you know, I loved it. It was hands-on and it was great, but I kind of knew I wasn't really a fish person. I actually really was fascinated by really small animals on a reef or really small animals in a tide pool. I was obsessed with these microscopic relationships that were happening. And I just wanted to understand that really micro world better. And then I just fell in love with coral reefs. After learning how to dive, I think that I love seeing sharks, I love seeing dolphins, I love seeing whales, but I could spend hours just staring at a coral reef because there's so many interactions happening on the small level that if you don't sit and watch it, you would never know that it's there. So I really started focusing my research more on symbiotic relationships. And because coral and algae have had this relationship for millions of years, and it is what sustains an entire ecosystem, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to go into that direction of research.
That's very cool. So did you start diving because of your interest in corals, or like did both those interests go side by side?
Well, I grew up in Arizona, which doesn't have an ocean anywhere near it. So when I told everybody that I wanted to be a marine biologist, they thought, you better have a backup plan because we live in a desert. And, you know, that just made me think, well, I better move. And I actually was able to learn how to scuba dive when I was in high school. For my 16th birthday, my parents got me scuba diving lessons, and I just fell in love with the fact that I could breathe underwater. And it was just like a beautiful space to be in, and this environment that I really I never took it for granted because I didn't get to see it much, but it was always new and fascinating because I didn't live next to the ocean. So being in it was always just an amazing experience. And then with learning how to scuba dive, it just further increased my desire to do marine science. And I just decided, you know what, I'm going to leave Arizona. I'll go to Florida. That's where I did my undergrad. There's oceans all around.
That's nice. So there's a question in the chat which talks about what exactly your career path was from your undergraduate years to your current research. So you mentioned the one internship you did. Was there any other sort of experience you had?
Yes. So in undergrad, I did one research internship for one summer. Directly after I graduated from undergrad, I went to do a research internship in Saudi Arabia. I was a part of King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, which is actually a very, very brand new university. They only started in 2009. But they have amazing facilities for science and engineering. I didn't really care about that when I showed up. All I wanted to do was dive in the Red Sea. I saw pictures of the coral reef there, and it was the most colorful reef I've ever seen. So I just wanted to go scuba diving. I just picked a pretty animal to study. I worked on giant clams. And after I was there, I really formed a great community with being and there with the professors, with the students, with the community of people. And I came back for my master's. So I went from my internship and then came back the following year to start the master's program at the same university.
That's very nice. So there's another question in the chat, which is more general. So are plant or animal systems a better model to study marine biology in terms of speed?
Speed and, well, I guess, does that mean speed in terms of how quickly the field is developing?
I think so.
I'll answer it in that way. I think both are developing very quickly, but what is the major development if you can find a research topic that fits with climate change issues, which most of them do nowadays, your research is going to be moving very quickly. The research that I do because it's actually a symbiotic relationship between coral, which is an animal, and algae, which is technically like a plant. It's like a combination of the two, and I look at genetic sequencing of the diversity of the algae that live in the coral. So you can actually combine your studies, animal and plant, and you can also look at microbiome of anything. So that is actually one of the fastest growing fields in marine science and other biological sciences. It's all about understanding what these microscopic organisms are doing, how they're helping us, just how we found out that our gut microbiome is so important. A coral microbiome actually helps them stay healthy. It helps them from getting diseases. It helps them from bleaching. And we're just now figuring out that there are millions of bacteria that help these animals, and they exist in fish, they exist in whales, they exist everywhere. So that's one of the fastest growing fields in marine science.
Yeah, we've also seen a great increase in microbiome research in general and looking at these communities of bacteria. So there's another general question here. Given the current rates of biodiversity loss, what is the role that engineers can play in the conservation of marine ecosystems?
Yeah, so actually to answer that, it's not just what can engineers do. It's what I've kind of come down to when asked this question, like how can we help conserve marine biodiversity? There's two ways to look at the question and two ways to answer it. There's the big problem, climate change, and then there's the smaller consequences that come from climate change. And even though climate change is such a large issue, we have to start developing solutions to it. We have to start tackling it now. That doesn't mean that the smaller solutions, let's say ways to shade a coral reef, or ways to increase certain types of fishery development, or ways to work with fisheries in a sustainable catching system. For example, like getting rid of certain types of nets that create a lot of bycatch. Those smaller solutions are actually really important, helping us buy time for that larger consequence that's coming out of the big problem, climate change. Of course, if you're in engineering and you're actually using biomimicry as part of your design for technologies, structures, building materials, you're actually creating something very sustainable. And that's the beautiful thing about biomimicry, is that if you're copying something from nature, it is sustainable by definition, because nature does not have the ability to waste energy. It doesn't have infinite resources. Every organism's action is a trade-off of energy and sacrificing some other thing. For example, if the energy goes into reproduction, it's not going to eat that much. If it goes into building a home for itself, it's going to slow down on maybe its immune system. And there's always a trade-off. So if you're focusing your engineering development and design based off of the sustainable biomimicry model, you will be creating a sustainable world for humans that is based off of the balance of how nature should be. So it's very hard to say an exact answer to that, but that's the best that I can give.
No, that was pretty insightful. I've never really thought about how when we take things from nature, it's already a little more sustainable because nature makes them that way.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of more questions in the chat that I'll combine. So if we have a dream of becoming an environmentalist or marine biologist, what sort of advice would you give to these budding researchers?
Specifically in marine science, people really want to see that you have hands-on research experience. I know that in this field, and probably in many other biology or just science fields in general, it's hard to find paid internships. It's hard to find paid experiences, but your work, your time is worth money. So try to find those positions that will pay you. There are a lot of opportunities out there. If you are in undergrad, try to find a summer internship. If you have graduated, you can even apply for jobs that will give you hands-on experience. Researchers especially like the work that I do, where it's very hands-on and it's in the field, we're always looking for people to help. So there's those types of labs that are out there that would love to have hands-on people just to learn things. And I'm very welcoming all the time of anybody that wants to learn things in the lab, because that is one of my expertise. I'm very good at doing technical things in the lab. So if you can even get into a lab at your university and just learn a couple protocols of how to extract DNA or how to run a PCR and those sorts of things, those would be great skills to add to your research CV. And then it's all about networking, really. If you can find people that will just bring you into their bubble of who they know and what types of opportunities they can offer you, the world just opens up. And with marine science, you quickly realize that the world is very small. So once you know one person, they'll introduce you to another, and then you get to a conference and you just recognize all these faces.
That sounds nice. I think that's how it works in general with most life sciences, where if you want to get into the field, experience is typically recommended. So to just close off this section, a quick question. How do you balance your research with all your other activities?
Yeah. This is always a fun one to answer because I don't really have an answer to that. I think that, to be honest, people in academia probably are not doing this very well. It's a field that's very product driven, and productivity is basically what you're evaluated on. And the whole idea of publishing papers and doing research and putting the output out there is still very strong in this culture. So I think for students, it's really important to, number one, have a hobby that is not your research. Number two, have a friend group that does not include any graduate students, like nobody in research, because then you can go hang out with people and not talk about your project. And I find myself that I'm friends with all of the people that I work with, and then when I get to hanging out with them, we just talk about work the whole time. So if you can avoid that, find a friend group that's just for rock climbing, or find a friend group that's just for scuba diving, or find a friend group that's just for some other activity that you love, so that when you do that, it is actually a break for yourself, because it's super important. And I know that now because being on program leave, because I'm in the US right now, I'm actually really enjoying taking a break, because now I can focus my energy on science communication and art and writing. And so sometimes you need a break, and that's always an option. I would also suggest, when you look for supervisors, if you're going to go into grad school, it's very important to ask them how they feel about mental health and how they will support that for you, because not a lot of supervisors know how to deal with that. Not a lot of people in general know how to deal with that. And you need to look out for yourself. Like, make sure you have a support network there before you start anything like this, because it is a really big challenge in your life. It's hard work and it's worth it, but look out for yourself and your mental health first.
That makes a lot of sense. Over to Bhamika for the next session.
Yeah, I think this also we can learn from nature, right? Community over competition. Like in nature, we see community-based ecosystems surviving more better than individual. So yeah, so we'll move on to the next session, which is going to be a fun session. We'll have a rapid fire round now, so which you can just give some funny answers. So in the middle of scuba diving, if you go invisible, what will you do? Like, what will you be willing to do?
I would hope that there was some other animal around to just get really up close and personal with. Like, I love scuba diving with sea turtles, and technically you shouldn't get very close to them because you don't want to disturb them. But if I was invisible, I would hang out with them all day.
Okay. So the next question is, if you have the ability to develop a potion which can change all the humans into some kind of marine organism, like which one will you choose?
We should all become coral. This is a huge coral reef.
All right. So, yeah, the next question is, if you are allowed to have a pet inside your lab, which marine organism will you choose?
Oh man. Okay, well, because I can choose anything, I would say dolphin. It's the most interactive.
Yeah, that's my filter right now. So I also love dolphins. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I love dolphins, even though I don't get to work with them.
So the last one is, if you have the power to change the human body, like something in your body, will you be willing to develop a brain with more capacity, or will you develop a pair of fins?
I think I'm going to go with the fins. I
Okay.
feel like that would just be a more blissful life.
I would consider this to be a biased answer. So you're because of your love towards marine biology. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great answer. So I think Naman has some questions about coral reefs and scuba diving. So he'll continue from here.
So yeah, my question is about coral reefs. How significant they are to the marine ecosystem?
Coral reefs are actually a basis ecosystem for a lot of fisheries. So if you rely on the ocean at all for protein, if you eat fish at all, most likely there is a connection back from that fish that you ate to a coral reef. If that fish didn't directly grow up as a juvenile on a coral reef, it somehow ate a fish that grew up on a coral reef, or it down the line did that same exact thing. Coral reefs are breeding ground. They're also the most productive areas in the ocean. They support a third of the biodiversity, and it's either the world or the ocean complete. And reefs themselves actually provide other interesting benefits to human society. For example, coastal cities, coastal development is actually well protected by coral reefs. So if there's a cyclone or there's a huge tropical storm that comes through, all of that wave energy is actually being slowed and dampened by a coral reef. So that means less destruction of our beaches, less destruction of our cities or towns, and less damage to just human society in general. And coral reefs are also kind of like rainforests of the ocean. They're actually sequestering a lot of carbon from the water and the atmosphere. So they're taking in a lot of that carbon, and that's helping us maintain a natural balance of the greenhouse gases that are, of course, out of control right now. So those are some examples. There's also things like tourism. So the idea that tons of countries are actually really heavily based on economic stability around tourism. Without coral reefs, that stability gets shattered. And that's something that we're seeing in places like Great Barrier Reef and the Maldives and some areas in the Florida Keys, where those tourism industries are starting to collapse because the corals are no longer as healthy as they once were.
So, I was searching about this. So, how climate change is specifically affecting coral reefs?
So, climate change has many consequences. For coral reefs specifically, the big one that actually doesn't get talked about as much as global warming or the increasing of temperatures is ocean acidification. And this is the process where, with all of the carbon going into the atmosphere, the ocean has naturally been a sink for that carbon. It's naturally absorbed the carbon. But we've gotten to a point where the ocean has done that so much that it's causing the pH to decrease, to start acidifying. And at a certain point, if you have acidic water, and then you also have organisms that build shells or skeletons out of calcium carbonate or limestone, that stuff starts to dissolve in acidic water. So basically, we're seeing corals growing their skeleton at a rate that does not allow them to continue growth, because at the same time, the water itself is dissolving those skeletons. So it's almost like we're putting, if you imagine like our human bones going through dissolving process, we don't have enough energy to reproduce if we're constantly trying to regrow our bones. And this is a major problem for coral reefs. They're just crumbling, basically. So that's ocean acidification, which is caused by all this carbon in our atmosphere. And then, of course, the other one is increase in global temperatures. So what we're seeing is almost every single summer, there is a bleaching event somewhere in the world. And we've had some major ones in 2016. And then in Australia, we had another one in 2020, where basically if the temperature gets above a critical threshold, which at this point, it could just be 1 degree Celsius above the maximum. It's that sensitive. Once it pushes that limit, the algae inside of the coral have a damaged photosystem. So they're no longer able to photosynthesize. So they're basically of no use to the coral, and the coral kicks them out. And without that algae, it basically starts to starve to death. And the reason why we call it coral bleaching is because the algae itself is what gives coral its color. And without it, we're seeing right through the translucent coral tissue right to the white skeleton. And corals can recover from bleaching, but it takes a while to recover. So if we have really hot summers for a really long time, those corals are just sitting there extremely hungry. And like I said, if you're losing some aspect of function, hunger, reproduction, growth, those things, then you're losing energy in other areas of your development. So corals that are starving and bleached are more susceptible to disease. They're not going to reproduce, they're not going to grow, and that just goes downhill for as long as the temperature stays high.
Okay, so there's a question in chat. How useful are artificial reefs, and are there any human efforts enough to restore coral reefs?
Artificial reefs are great. So a lot of what we're seeing is when corals bleach, they can recover, but if they're recovering off of skeletons that are also degrading or dissolving, it's not going to go as fast. So artificial reefs are actually helpful because they allow new baby coral, to settle onto a substrate that is there and that is not dissolved. So it allows baby coral to settle, and that's great. We need that. Artificial reefs are probably not going to solve the big problems. Like I said, the big problem of climate change, the big problem of ocean acidification, those problems are not going to be addressed with these smaller solutions, but the smaller solutions are still really important to help us buy us time. And then some other examples of human interaction and human intervention with coral reef restoration is like coral farming and trying to replant corals from different areas to create kind of like a super coral. So for example, corals in the Red Sea are actually exposed to really warm temperatures all the time. For many years, they've been adapted to high temperatures because the Red Sea has just always been really hot. So coral bleaching doesn't happen that much there because they're already adapted to a warmer temperature. And the idea is maybe the Red Sea is like a living laboratory for what our future oceans are going to look like. So is it possible to take some of the corals from the Red Sea and transplant them somewhere else, see if they can grow there? There's obviously a lot of ecological consequences that would come out of that, but there are ideas where we're trying to create human intervented adaptation and human assisted adaptation to help corals adapt faster to climate change. And although those things are still in the processing stages and we're still not seeing amazing solutions from these things, it's still helpful, like I said, because without this type of research, we're not doing anything that's benefiting the reef. And so we're there trying to work on it. But of course, the bigger problem comes from a whole paradigm shift of how we see our finite resources. So it's more about mindset of society than it is about the human intervention, but both things are really important for the solution.
Okay, thank you. Back to Vamini.
Yeah, so I think you forgot about scuba diving, so that's the most interesting part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how was your first experience of scuba diving?
I thought it was going to be super scary, but I was actually able to be a part of a student group learning how to dive together. So I made friends with people that were in the classes with me. I really enjoyed my instructors. I felt really comfortable, and I think that was really important. You need to feel comfortable with the person who is teaching you. And the first lesson, we were in the ocean for our first lesson, but we were on a very shallow sandy bottom. So we just kneeled down in maybe 4 feet of water. If we wanted to get out of the water, we could just stand up. So it wasn't scary at all. It was just, we had to get used to breathing underwater. We also had to get used to the feeling of what happens when your air runs out. Because obviously you're not supposed to go that far. You're not supposed to go past a certain amount. But if your air runs out, you have to know what that feels like. So we would kneel down on the sandy bottom, and our partners would turn off our tanks, and we could feel it. It was like you try to take a breath out of the regulator, and it felt very tight. It felt like you really had suck in air. And then I don't have any air left. And then they turn it back on. So all the scary things about diving, we practice in a really safe environment. It was great to learn that way. When most people learn how to dive, they usually do their first lesson in a pool, which is also great because it's a swimming pool. We know that environment, and there's nothing else around us that's foreign. So yeah, the first time it was kind of scary, but it was as comfortable as it probably could have been.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely recommend learning how to scuba dive. There's so many courses that you can do now that are just Discover diving, which doesn't require full certification, but you just want to get the feeling for what diving is like. It's a really amazing world down there. The sounds are very different. You think that it'll be dead quiet, but it's not. You can hear fish munching on coral. You can hear things zooming by you. Everything underwater, the sound is just different. It's a totally different world, but it's very peaceful. And it's also kind of almost the only environment we can be in that feels completely weightless. So it's actually, scuba diving is one of the ways that astronauts train for going up into space, because it's maybe the only environment we have on Earth that can really replicate zero gravity.
Thank you.
Okay, I think now Sankalpa has some questions on women in STEM and SciComm.
Yeah. So there was also a question in the chat. So two-part question. How did you discover that you had a passion for doing science communication? And how would you suggest that someone starting out could try to be a science communicator?
So I never knew I wanted to do science communication. I was on a path thinking that I just wanted to become a researcher, maybe a professor one day. And I was at KAUST, where I did my master's, and we had a course called The Science of Storytelling. And this was just a fun 3-week course that we got to take just as an extra side thing. And I remember being annoyed because I had to take this course and I didn't really care about it so much. But when I got into the class, it was actually a team of coral reef scientists and filmmakers. And what we were doing is we were learning how to take our research, the really technical, really detailed stuff of our research, and turn it into a story that somebody would be interested in listening to. And we did it in under 1 minute. And if anybody could summarize a thesis in under 1 minute, that is already expertise science communication. Because it's multiple years of work condensed in 60 seconds. But that was the course that really made me think, wow, I love this. I love explaining science concepts to a wider audience. I think that the fact that academics are kind of in this bubble of publishing and dealing with journals that they pay to publish in, and then you have to pay to read them. It's a cycle that doesn't let that science get out to the wider public. And the wider public are the people making the decision. They're the ones that have the real action. So I kind of found that I was really good at communicating my research story to people that had no idea what a coral was. And that was just really fun for me. And I decided, you know what, this is a skill that I have. I'm going to perfect that. And I think that that's what I'm going to go for.
So is that how you sort of founded the ECOS community?
Yeah, ECOS came from a previous project I was working with that was just art-based. It was a student group on campus that was just meant to be a creative escape for people that were doing research all the time. And after seeing how much scientists really love to get creative, I was like, wait, we got to combine this. And so when I started my PhD, I was really a big advocate for interdisciplinary approaches to things. And yeah, so I actually reached out to a bunch of people in Sydney that were artists, and I did this maybe the first week that I moved down to Australia. So showing up, not knowing what the country was like, not even understanding what my university was like, I just started finding people on Instagram, and I was like, you're doing art that relates to climate change. Like, I really think you should get involved in this initiative that I'm trying to create. And I just found a team of artists, and I also had my team of scientists because they're my colleagues. And we just got together and we started working on projects together. And I wanted this community, ECOS itself, to grow with me. So right now I'm just working on actually bringing those projects more to a wider audience through a digital space because everything is remote now. But yeah, so that's kind of what led me to bring those two together. And I'm still, it's a discipline that's like a pioneering discipline. So art and science have always been separated. I don't know why, but they shouldn't be. I think that they're both methods for trying to understand and communicate the truth. So I think that art has amazing aspects about it that make it more relatable to people. Like when you look at art, your emotions are evoked, your emotions come up, and emotions are what inspires somebody to act. So if you can use art for communicating science in the way that communicates the truth, hopefully we then have a lot of people acting on good emotions to change in that way.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think like even making figures for like normal papers is really a work of art.
Yes,
So,
it is.
So are there other sci-art initiatives that have inspired your work? I really like that you have all these collaborations with like people to just Instagram.
Yeah, I don't know why I was so brave to do that, because it is kind of a strange thing to do, just reach out to people on Instagram. But it's become kind of normal now. I think that people are really open to sharing their ideas, sharing their thoughts, and working collaboratively. And as long as you have something to offer the other person, like this whole idea of symbiosis, if you can bring something to the table and they can bring something to the table and it makes sense to collaborate, I think that you can definitely make it work. And I've already seen things working from across countries. I mean, what we're doing today is like collaboration across continents. So some other sci-art initiatives that I was inspired by was actually the Ocean Agency. It's actually a creative communicating science platform that uses creative communications to get ocean science conservation research out there, and they did a beautiful campaign for coral bleaching and coral stress that was called like the glowing campaign, and they use like colors and art to really evoke emotions and bring you closer to the coral reef. They also have done a great job doing just like Google Street View, it does everything on land. They've actually created Google Street View for coral reefs. So the Ocean Agency will actually let you go in and just do a whole 360 tour of different reefs in the Great Barrier Reef and the Galapagos and all over the world. So it's super accessible, and I think that that type of approach is really important for the wider public.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. I think our audience might also be interested in checking those out and like getting to experience the Great Barrier Reef for themselves, even if they might not know how to scuba dive yet.
Yes, I think that that's maybe one of the most important things to connect with the coral reef ecosystem is just if you can't see it physically, like research it, watch the documentaries. Like there's a beautiful documentary called Chasing Coral. And my mom had never seen a coral reef. She watched this movie and she was crying. She called me on the phone and she said, Melissa, how do I help save the corals? And like those sorts of initiatives are the ways that we're going to get people to think about things and to actually act.
That's very heartwarming. So segueing into a related topic, so I saw from one of your ECOS initiatives that you've been trying to use SIA to raise awareness about gendered experiences and the different challenges that women may face in academia. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I've always been a strong advocate for women leadership and women in science. I think that in the past, because science and STEM-based fields have really been male-dominated, I think for women to get to a point of competing with those men, they've always had to kind of act like a man as well. Like, put emotions aside, put those soft skills aside, like really just work on like, I'm going to be a good scientist, I'm going to get the data out there, I'm going to be super competitive. And we needed those women. We needed the women to pioneer that path for us. But right now, we are ready for the next generation of women leaders. And I think it's super important to actually harness those skills that women naturally have, like communication skills, emotional intelligence, interpersonal relational skills, to actually bring that to the table of science leadership, because that's the next step. That's where we're going to get action. And women make up half the population. So if you're not going to include them in your audience, you're missing a huge number of people that can actually make a difference in the world. And I think right now, like, as what we've been seeing in US politics and things that are going on in the world, women are very empowered. And I think it's time that we take control of the fact that we can be leaders as women and we don't have to fight in a competitive world and pretend that we don't have these other skills. So I think that it's very important to just know that we're ready. We're ready for women to take on some of those leadership roles.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I would just add to that, the initiative that I did through ECOS, the Women in STEAM, was actually a photography exhibit. And another point here is that because women in science have generally been lower in number compared to men, the representation and like actually seeing a woman in science is really important. And that's just across the board for all minorities in every single field. Representation is really important. If a woman walks into, or if a young girl walks into a university and all the images of scientists that she sees are men, it's very hard for her to realize or imagine herself in that position. So this photography exhibit combined images of women in very natural settings. Like, I didn't have the photographer do any sort of stereotypical women portraits. I did just everybody as natural and as happy and normal as they could be. Like, scientists are people too, and that's what I wanted to show. And then we also had, accompanied with the photography, was the actual story of that person. So it was the personal story, the career story, and how those two went together, and then like them being a strong advocate for other women in science. And I think all of that put together really created a good space for the next generation of female scientists to imagine what they could look like on that wall. So yeah, representation is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Like, whenever I hear stories from like senior female scientists, I feel really inspired to know that they made it there, and like,
yeah,
like it's just inspiring because you know, maybe we can do it too.
I mean, you can, and women supporting women is also really important. And then the other part of this whole conversation is that men are not excluded from this conversation. Like, men can be feminists, men can support women, men can do it in a way that like feels good for them and then also benefits them. Like, having a diverse team, including women on your research team, actually brings so many other unique perspectives to science that wouldn't be there if women weren't at the table.
Definitely. Over to Mamini for the last section.
Yeah, so I think at least in this live room, it's not biased towards men. I think it's biased towards women. So I think we should give some space for Naman to speak. So he'll ask the
Yeah.
questions on and climate
Yeah,
change.
yeah. My idea is like an overall change in thinking is required. So we need to remove this gender bias and see women in STEM as equal. So there are a lot of roles men play around women. So the active roles I think are played by the men whom women work around, like colleagues and all. So it kind of, I think, becomes a responsibility to, because like you said, there are always less women in a lab or a department or a university than men. So it kind of becomes a responsibility to make them feel comfortable, listen to them, and support them in any way, and give an unbiased weightage to their ideas and opinions, and overall create a positive research and or work environment. So I think that helps in a lot of way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I think because I have always seen there are always less women in a department or a lab, even my lab. So it becomes your kind of responsibility, so they don't feel left out in some sense. So just talk to them, hear them, support them, listen to them, things like that will help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also important to address the fact that women in science tend to stay in the science field up until a certain age, and that age also coincides with when people get married and have kids. And the other part about this equality or gender biasing is actually that, you know, women are different from men, and a lot of the times women are taking on those childcare responsibilities. And so even though we want to say men and women are equal, it's more about providing equity. It's more about, okay, we understand that you as a woman might have different responsibilities at home. Maybe you can't come into the lab today because you can find a babysitter for your kid. I mean, there are so many other things that are behind the scenes, and that's the same for men too. Like, we all come into the research world, or we all come into the professional world with our own backstories, our own personal stories. And so to just show up in the workplace and not have judgment on that is the best thing that we can do for both men and women in that space.
Awesome. So yeah, so the final section is to talk a little more deeper about biomimicry. Like, can you tell us some professional courses or places in which we can get trained in biomimicry?
I don't know if I know of any specific biomimicry institutions, but I do know that most schools that are very heavily focused on technology and STEM fields are practicing biomimicry in all their engineering departments. So I currently work for the University of Pennsylvania, and in their engineering department, they have some amazing art and science collaboration where they're actually using some material that creates shrimp shells. It's called chitin. And they found a way to produce chitin in a way that they could create these beautiful lattices and create flexible yet durable structures. And what that means is they're creating building materials. They're creating structures that can be used for anything, but they're super lightweight. And they're also disposable. Like, they're making plastic bags that you can dispose in your sink. So there are great collaborations that are happening. I think with biomimicry, it's by definition is interdisciplinary. So if you're going into that field wanting to study something in biomimicry, I would suggest go into an engineering department, but actually look for lab groups that are heavily involved in different fields. So students that are working with professors from an art background or a biological or ecological background, as well as engineering, it will be more likely that you'll find that biomimicry overlap. So some of the schools that I know of are like MIT. KAUST actually does a lot of biomimicry work. UNSW is working on things there. They have really amazing spaces like maker spaces and entrepreneurship opportunities. And those are very important for biomimicry fields because a lot of what you're doing there is you're creating a product. So if you have a makerspace or you have opportunities to apply for grants to fund startups, those are the kinds of institutions you should look for if you're into a biomimicry career path.
I think in India, we have some courses in biomimicry. For example, even my department offers a course in biomimicry. But what I've usually seen is the National Institute of Design kind of institutes have a special focus on biomimicry. And I am not sure if you know him. His name is Yashas Shetty. So he is a scientist from NCBS, which is a very good institution in our country. So he actually creates music from bacteria, and he actually engineers music from bacteria, and he also extracted the genes for what causes the good smell during rain. So he also tried to recreate the process. So he's quite popular at global level also. So he has always been my biggest inspiration. So I think in India, mostly we can see this kind of work going on in National Institute of Design. So it's not yet so prominent in engineering kind of institutes.
That's true. Design schools actually have a lot of inspiration from nature. And I have seen that myself at the University of Pennsylvania, the Weitzman School of Design. They're working on so many different things that are nature-based. And they also include robotics. It's such an interdisciplinary field, and engineering in itself is interdisciplinary because engineering is actually just identifying a problem and then creating some sort of product or technology that will solve it. So engineering in itself can be in design, it can be in marine science, it can be in physics, it can be in any of those fields. But really look for where you're going to find interdisciplinary fields because that is probably most important for this overlap of biomimicry.
Okay. I think Naman, you can continue the section on biomimicry and industrial.
Yeah. So, how can biomimicry drive sustainability?
So I feel like this is a pretty broad answer because there's so many technologies that can be inspired by biomimicry. But like I said before, biomimicry in itself can not be anything but sustainable. It's the idea of conserving energy, conserving production, conserving actual material to create something. And all of the conservation of those things means that there's less energy being expelled to do that. So that's already just a sustainable way to create building materials or product or design. But a lot of engineering technologies that are coming out of the biomimicry ideas are actually very focused on how are we going to produce renewable energies. So like I was saying before with the whale fin inspired wind turbine or the holdfast inspired wave energy floats, all of these technologies that are being inspired by biomimicry are also trying to solve some of these larger issues that are in relation to climate change or renewable resources or food shortage or things like that. So I think that it kind of goes hand in hand with your actual product that you make through a biomimicry model is already sustainable. And then the solution that you're trying to use it for is already trying to make the world more sustainable place. So you're kind of going at it two directions. And I think that's a great way to be a part of the sustainable solutions for future of our planet.
Yeah. So from a industrial point of view, so how can biomimicry fit for solving industrial problems?
Yeah. So I guess that this is also kind of comes from the last answer that I gave, is that biomimicry can actually solve problems that you wouldn't even know are problems. For example, I just looked up how a bird's skeleton is that birds' bones are hollow, makes them very light, and their skeleton is designed in such a way that makes them able to fly without exerting tons of energy. They're actually using this idea of this lattice kind of bone structure and really, really light material to create the future airplane. So the entire airplane is going to be designed like a bird skeleton with really lightweight bones per se. And this is the idea of what the future of airline travel is going to look like by 2050. At least that's what they're trying to predict. And some of the ideas around this also go into the next question about the lightweight material, is that the less something weighs, the less energy you have to put into transporting it, the less energy you have to put into creating it. And then it just makes the product itself so much easier to maneuver, whatever that may be. And that could be an airplane to an artificial bone or a piece of something that would like fix anything in your body. You want it to be lightweight, you want it to be natural, you want it to be mimicking nature. So all of those things kind of direct us more towards a sustainable industry, and a lot of industrial problems like food waste and trying to sequester carbon from the atmosphere are actually coming from ideas from nature. And another example is something that's being developed at Arizona State University, and this is called the mechanical tree. It's actually a tree that takes carbon dioxide out of the air, but it's designed as a stack, a cylinder stack. And it's basically an idea of creating artificial leaves and creating the process of photosynthesis in a human created way. So it's actually a pretty cool technology, and that's another industry solution there.
Okay, so actually I am from mechanical background, so it's very interesting for me to listen all about how this biomimicry can help in solving various industrial problems. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's all over the place. I mean, yeah, it's amazing. I love the topic now.
Yeah, that's it, Vamini.
Yeah, so Sankalpa, do you have to say something?
No more questions from my end, but I just want to say that it was really nice hearing about your experiences and how you discovered your passion for research and how you stumbled upon science communication and found that you had a knack for it, and all the tips that you shared with us through this talk.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you guys, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions if people still have questions that they want to post later. I'd be happy to still engage. It was a lot of fun for me to look even more into biomimicry and connect that to my own research and connect that to big picture of climate change. But yeah, I'm super happy that you guys are hosting this event, and yeah, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, again. So it was really an interesting talk for us because this is the first session we are conducting on biomimicry. I'm sure it is going to inspire many of them, and we are going to have a special focus in the Research Scholars Day event coming up in April. So if you would like to propose any contest for a student, so you can reach out to me later, and we can actually conduct it, and we'll be happy to see like many people inspired by your work as well as towards this field. So please feel free to reach out to us after the session or anytime when you are available.
That sounds great.
Yeah. I think it's late night for you right now, and we are very thankful for being so like awake at this time of the day and so fresh. And I don't think you are tired at all. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's been good. I mean, it's only 10:30 here, so it's all right. I'm happy to be awake, and I'm glad this time worked out for everybody.
Sure. We hope to see you again soon in some other collaboration or any other event again. So thank you again, Melissa.
Thank you.
Yeah. From the audience, do you have any other questions? Would you like to ask anything, or we can close the session? Actually, I have one question in the question box. Like, what are the reforms for fighting plastic pollution in the oceans?
There are a lot of, like I said, the smaller type solutions, like the cleanup of oceans with ocean plastics. I think a lot of things have already happened, like banning of microplastics in face washes. We used to have that issue. There's a lot of clothing that now doesn't use as much plastic fibers in their production, because that was another issue where you're washing your clothes and it would come out in the wash. Plastic consumption, if people could just consume less plastic, that would be great. But some of these materials that are now being developed are actually nature-based, and if they're degradable and they can degrade in the ocean, that's great. But I think it really comes down to our entire idea of this consumer culture. And if we can focus more about what are we buying at the grocery store? Can we skip putting an apple in a plastic bag when we buy it? Can we maybe bring reusable bags instead of having plastic grocery bags? Can we have a reusable water bottle instead of using plastic water bottles? I mean, these are all everyday choices that people can make on an individual level.
Yeah, thank you. So everyone in the audience, you can reach out to her on Instagram. So we have shared her ID if you have any questions, and also she's active on LinkedIn. So you can ask her further questions in any of the social media. So thank you for joining on a Saturday morning, everyone. We hope to see you in the next session again, which will happen on next Saturday. I think it's going to be a group chat like this with different people from India. So they are young science communicators, and we hope you'll enjoy that session also. Thank you all. See you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
We are available on YouTube as Career Development Cell Research IIT Madras. If you want to find us on Instagram, LinkedIn or Facebook, you can type IIT Madras Research Affairs Teams. If you want to write us, you can mail us at cdc_research@sml.iitm.ac.in.